It is 3 a.m. and your baby has been asleep for 2 hours. Not fussing, not stirring, genuinely, deeply asleep. You checked on them 20 minutes ago and they were still, peaceful, breathing slowly. You finally allowed yourself to relax. Maybe you even fell asleep yourself. And then it happens. Not a whimper, not a gradual escalation, a full cry, sudden and urgent, cutting through the silence of the house like something is very wrong. You are out of bed before you are fully awake, moving down the hallway on pure adrenaline, running through every possible explanation before you even reach the door. Hunger, gas, fever, something you forgot to do. And then you pick them up, and the crying slows, and you stand there in the dark holding a baby who is already settling, with no obvious cause and no clear answer, wondering what just happened. Every parent knows this moment, and most parents experience it dozens of times in the first year alone. And almost none of them have ever been given a real explanation for why it happens. Not hunger, not a nightmare, not a coincidence. What you just witnessed is one of the most predictable and least understood events in infant neuroscience. And it starts with the fact that your baby's sleep looks almost nothing like yours. When an adult falls asleep, the brain moves through a relatively predictable architecture. Light sleep, then deep sleep, then REM, then back toward light sleep, cycling through roughly every 90 minutes. The transitions between stages are smooth enough that most adults sleep through them entirely, never fully surfacing between cycles. A baby's sleep architecture is completely different. Their cycles are shorter, roughly 45 to 50 minutes compared to your 90. Their proportion of REM sleep is dramatically higher, sometimes accounting for half of their total sleep time. And the transitions between sleep stages, which adults navigate without noticing, are for a baby's underdeveloped brain a genuine neurological challenge. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that manages and smooths over these transitions in adults, is one of the last regions to mature. In the first year of life, it is still building the basic infrastructure it needs to do its job, which means every time your baby moves from deep sleep toward a lighter stage, there is no sophisticated regulatory system standing by to manage the crossing. The transition happens anyway, but it happens without the guardrails. And sometimes, in that unguarded moment between deep sleep and the surface, something activates that was not supposed to activate. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, ancient and fast and always watching, reads the transition as ambiguous. Neither fully asleep nor fully awake, neither fully safe nor fully oriented. And it does what it was built to do. It fires. Not because there is a threat, but because in the absence of clear information, the amygdala defaults to alert. And a baby who cannot yet self-regulate, who has no prefrontal cortex standing by to say, "This is fine, go back to sleep," gets the full force of that activation with no filter and no break. The result is a cry that sounds like something is very wrong. Because from the perspective of your baby's nervous system, in that unguarded moment, something felt like it was. Now here is the layer that most sleep guides completely miss. The amygdala activation explains the startle and the sudden cry, but it does not fully explain why the crying is so intense, or why it happens more on some nights than others, or why certain babies experience it far more frequently than their peers. For that, you need to understand something called the separation monitoring system, the actual biological process that runs underneath what we call separation anxiety. From the moment your baby is born, their nervous system is running a continuous background process that is automatic, ancient, and completely below the level of conscious awareness. And it is asking, constantly, one question: where is my caregiver? This process runs during waking hours, obviously, but here is what most parents do not know. It does not stop during sleep. The attachment monitoring system continues to operate at a low level throughout the night, tracking proximity, tracking scent, tracking sound, using every available signal to maintain a rough sense of whether the primary caregiver is nearby. In the deepest stages of sleep, this monitoring is suppressed enough that it does not cause waking, but in the transition zones, those unguarded crossings between sleep stages, the suppression lifts briefly. And in that window, the monitoring system gets a chance to check in. If the signals are reassuring, your smell is nearby, the ambient sound matches your presence, the sensory environment feels familiar and safe, the check-in completes quietly, and the baby slides back into the next sleep cycle without surfacing. But if the signals are ambiguous, or if the sensory environment feels different from when the baby fell asleep, the check-in does not complete quietly. The attachment alarm activates, and because the baby is partially between states, not fully asleep and not fully awake, the response comes out as something that looks like a sudden, urgent cry from nowhere. This is why babies often cry out more intensely on nights when the household routine was disrupted, when they fell asleep somewhere other than their usual place, or when the ambient sounds of the house are different, or when they can sense that something in the emotional environment is off. And they can sense this more than most parents realize. Research from the Max Planck Institute has shown that infants can detect elevated cortisol in their caregivers through scent alone, within minutes of exposure. They do not need to see your face or hear your voice. The chemistry of your stress travels through the air and registers in their biology, which means a parent who goes to bed anxious, carrying the tension of a difficult day into the night, is quietly changing the sensory environment their baby wakes into during those transition moments. Not dramatically, not consciously, but enough that the attachment monitoring system reads it as a signal worth responding to. This is not your fault. It is not something you need to eliminate entirely, but it is worth knowing, because it means that one of the most effective things you can do for your baby's nighttime waking is not a new sleep method or a different schedule. It is your own regulation, your own calm, the biological signal that travels from your nervous system into theirs, even while you are both asleep. Now let's talk about what you actually do in the moment. Because knowing the neuroscience is useful, but at 3 a.m., what you need is something practical. The first thing to understand is that your response in the first 30 seconds matters more than almost anything else. Not because you can stop the cry immediately, you often cannot, but because the nervous system that just fired a threat response is now scanning for information about whether the threat was real. Your presence is the most powerful data point available. When you walk into the room, when your baby hears your voice and smells your scent and feels your hands, the attachment monitoring system receives the answer it was looking for. Caregiver present, environment safe, threat assessment, false alarm, and the cortisol that spiked during the transition begins to come down. The key is to arrive calm, not performing calm, but actually regulated, as much as you can be at 3 a.m. on interrupted sleep. Because the same mechanism that sends your stress into your baby's biology during the day works at night too. A panicked parent arriving at a crying baby does not deliver the false alarm signal. It delivers a signal that reads more like confirmation. This is hard. Nobody is calm at 3 a.m. But even the intention of slowing your breath before you walk in, of dropping your shoulders, of deciding before you open the door that this is manageable, that intention changes your physiology enough to change what your baby receives. The second thing to understand is that you do not need to figure out what is wrong. In most cases, nothing is wrong. The cry is not a symptom of a problem that needs to be solved. It is a biological event that needs to be witnessed. Your job is not to diagnose. Your job is to be present. Pick them up, let them hear your heartbeat, let your warmth and scent do the work that language cannot do at 3 a.m. Most of the time, within a few minutes, the nervous system resets and the baby goes back to sleep. Now, when should you pay closer attention? Developmental pediatricians are clear that the vast majority of nighttime crying in infants is exactly what we have described: normal, neurological, temporary. But there are signals worth noting. If the crying is accompanied by fever, unusual posture, or difficulty breathing, those are conversations to have with your pediatrician. If the crying consistently lasts longer than 20 minutes without any settling, that is also worth mentioning. And if nighttime waking suddenly increases dramatically after a period of relative calm, that change in pattern is worth tracking, not because something is necessarily wrong, but because shifts in sleep behavior can sometimes reflect shifts in development or health that are worth understanding. Trust your instincts. You are, as we have said before, probably the most finely calibrated instrument in existence for reading your own child. The fact that something feels different is information worth paying attention to. But most of the time, what you are witnessing at 3 a.m. is not a problem. It is a developing brain doing exactly what developing brains do, navigating a neurological transition without the tools to do it smoothly, and reaching for the one signal that tells it everything is okay. You. So the next time the silence breaks and you find yourself moving down that hallway before you are fully awake, remember what is actually happening. A brain that is still learning how to sleep just hit a rough patch in the crossing. The amygdala fired, the attachment system called out, And the answer to all of it is the same thing it has always been. You walking through the door. If this changed how you experience those 3 a.m. moments, subscribe and drop a comment below. I want to know, what does your baby's nighttime waking look like? Because every parent in this community has stood in that hallway, and none of them are alone in it. And if you want to understand why your baby seems to know you are stressed before you have said a single word, why they sense it in the room before you have even looked at them, that is the next video. And the science behind how they do it is one of the most remarkable things researchers have ever found.